Hi, I'm your friend, your lawyer friend, who happens to be an advocate. Call me Rory if you like. And welcome to episode 1 of Legal Juice, the podcast. Today we're discussing finding the right lawyer. But before we do that, thank you so much to our sponsor, Makers Valley Partnership, and to Kopana, our producer. So let's start. Let's start at the beginning. Let's say you have a problem. You need help. You have to know who to ask, right? I mean, when are you going to approach an attorney versus an advocate? Where are you even going to find one? What's the difference? Are you going to go to a prosecutor to look for help with the problem, or maybe a conveyancer, or even a notary public? I mean, are all of these still lawyers? Let's break it down. Let's break it down so that it's easy to understand. Let's start with the attorney. Now, an attorney will probably be the starting point for most people when they come into a challenge. Attorneys are lawyers. They're specialists in the law. They hold law degrees from any of our universities. If you have a legal problem, they can easily advise you on how to solve it or refer you to the correct channels if that's necessary. Attorneys usually appear and they can take your matters in the lower courts. So these are the magistrates' courts. They're usually found everywhere. But attorneys can also appear in the higher courts, like the High Court or the Supreme Court if they have what we call right of appearance. It's really just a sort of license that they need to appear in the higher courts. You can find them everywhere. You can find attorneys in office parks, in malls, residential areas, the yellow pages if you're from that generation, or even Google. Now let's talk about advocates. Advocates also are sometimes referred to as counsel, so don't let that term confuse you. In fact, if you've ever wondered what the term senior counsel means, it actually really just refers to a senior advocate who's been awarded that title by the president after practicing for a certain number of years. Okay, look, there is a little more to it than that, but we'll discuss that another time. So anyway, advocates, like attorneys, are lawyers. The difference is that we specialize in litigation and we like to spend our time in court. By the way, that's what litigation means. It literally just means arguing cases in court. Advocates are specialists in the art of persuasion, and we focus a lot on using evidence and the law of evidence to argue our clients' cases in court. So it goes without saying that the only time you'll probably need to brief an advocate is if your matter is likely to end up in court. At least that's the case most of the time. Advocates can appear in any court, including the higher courts and the lower ones, from the moment we become admitted. Remember, as attorneys, we don't set up shop anywhere. Advocates practice from specially allocated buildings and offices that we call chambers. And unfortunately, we don't take instructions from the public. We only take them from attorneys. You actually wouldn't start with an advocate if you needed legal assistance. You'd go to an attorney who would then advise if it's necessary to brief counsel, and who would only instruct an advocate if it's necessary. Now, there are exceptions. The Legal Practice Act allows advocates who have what's called a Fidelity Fund certificate and a trust account to take instructions directly from the public. So it can be done. But if you're not sure, just ask the advocate. Advocates are also usually brought into matters that might be slightly more complicated or where the stakes are high. But I don't want you to think that your attorney is incompetent if she suggests briefing counsel in your matter. In fact, I've always found it a pleasure to work with competent attorneys because then we can guide each other and make each other alive to all sorts of legal technicalities in your case. In the perfect setting, working with an attorney should really be seen to be teamwork, and it shouldn't be seen as an attorney briefing a superior lawyer of some sort. Because to tell you the truth, there really is no hierarchy between attorneys and advocates. Now let's move on to the conveyancer. To become a conveyancer, you have to first be an attorney. So conveyancers are lawyers. Their specialty is the transfer of property. Immovable property, that is. So that includes things like a house, a flat, a piece of land, or even a farm. If you're looking to buy one of these, you have to know that the sale must be in writing, and there's actually a process that has to follow before the property is transferred into your name. Maybe I'll do an episode just on that process. Maybe I'll bring in a friend. What do you think? Let me know. Conveyancers usually set up their own firms, or they work for law firms that already exist, but not all law firms would have one. And please also remember, even though conveyancers are attorneys, not all attorneys are conveyancers. So if you're not sure, please ask. You can also check the website of the Legal Practice Council to look for one if you need to, or do a simple internet search if you're looking for one. Now, the notary public. If you're looking to get married, you might not need to consult a notary, unless of course you want to be married out of community of property. In that case, you're going to need someone to draft an antenuptial contract for you that would specify the conditions of your marriage. Like for instance, if you're getting married out of community of profit and loss, or whether the accrual is going to apply to your marriage or not. But we'll touch on those concepts a little later in the season, so keep listening. Notaries are attorneys, so they can also set up shop anywhere. Remember, even though notaries are attorneys, not all attorneys are notaries. So again, if you're not sure, please ask. Look for them online, or contact any firm of attorneys to ask for one or for referral for a good one. You should keep in mind that a notary's job is actually to draft and register all notarial deeds, not just an antenuptial contract. But of course, that's a good example. So notarial deeds are really just contracts that by law have to be signed and witnessed in the presence of a notary. Like for instance, a postnuptial contract, or a deed of servitude, or a deed of cession, that sort of a thing. But we'll discuss all of that another time. But it is good to remember that these guys deal mainly with contract drafting. Your attorney should advise you if it's necessary to see one, but at least now you know more or less what it is that they do. Let's talk about the public prosecutor. To be fair, even though a prosecutor may be a lawyer or an attorney, he or she isn't really someone that you'd go to as a starting point if you needed help with a legal problem. Prosecutors work for the National Prosecuting Authority, and essentially they represent the state in criminal matters. They appear or take cases to the lower courts, being the magistrates' courts, and their job is to make sure that they prosecute anyone who's accused of committing a crime. If a public prosecutor appears in a high court and they've been admitted as an advocate, then they'd be called a state advocate. Their job is pretty much the same as a prosecutor's job, to be honest with you, except maybe they need more preparation for their cases because the stakes are a bit higher. Let's suppose you're the victim of a crime, any crime, maybe a hijacking. You'd report this to the police and they would conduct a proper investigation. At least you hope they would. If they manage to gather enough evidence, they'll then hand it over to the prosecuting authority, and the prosecuting authority decides whether to prosecute the person accused of the crime. Once a prosecutor or state advocate has been appointed, there's really nothing to stop you from asking for information on how the case is proceeding, or asking for clarity on issues that you might not understand pertaining to the case. But other than that, to be honest, you typically wouldn't bother these guys and girls at all. Let's move on to a legal advisor or a consultant. Now, logic tells me that you can only consult on a topic that you're familiar with, right? So it goes without saying that these guys should be lawyers, or they should at least have some legal background. I'd be a little concerned about a legal advisor who didn't have a legal background, to be honest. Legal advisors often work in a corporate setting, like a bank or an insurance company, but that's not necessary. They can also work for a municipality, an NGO, or some other entity. Their job essentially is to advise their organizations and clients on different legal matters. A legal consultant pretty much would do the same, except that they'd often run their own firms, consulting firms, where they'd give advice and direction on various topics. They're also would often be available to the public, so they're not really that hard to find. A simple internet search should be enough if you're looking for a legal consultant. But please remember, if they're not registered with the Legal Practice Council as attorneys, they can't do the work of an attorney for you. So let's make an example. If you needed advice on how to wind up someone's deceased estate, maybe they could help by giving you advice on that. But the actual work of winding up a deceased estate might require a practicing attorney's involvement, depending on the size of the estate. We'll chat more about that again later on in the season. So keep an ear out. Finally, let's quickly touch on the office of the family advocate. Unfortunately, families sometimes break down. We can't help it. Marriages and relationships come to an end, and sometimes children are affected by those changing dynamics. Whatever happens, you must remember that in terms of our law, the best interest of a child must always take first priority. And that's exactly what the family advocate concerns him or herself with. So anytime parents draw up a parenting plan or agreement as part of a divorce settlement, the family advocate's endorsement would be required before a decree of divorce is granted. The family advocate should also be consulted where anyone seeks to become the legal guardian of a minor child. Now, there are a number of other roles that lawyers can play, but I'm not really going to discuss all of them today. But with what you now know, you should be confident enough to know where to start if you think you might need legal help, since I've touched on some of the most popular roles lawyers play in our society. Alright, that's it, folks. That's all the chatting we have time for today. Thank you so much for tuning into our first episode. Please remember to share the link with all your friends and family. And please follow the podcast on Twitter at juice_legal is our handle. Let me know what else you might want to chat about or whatever comments you might have. And if you're on YouTube, please like, share this content, and subscribe to our channel so we can make the circumference bigger. Until next time, Lerato.